Okay. Can I have everybody's name? We'll start with you.
Mikey.
Mikey.
Natalie.
Nick.
Helen. Sit down for a minute. I'm Tasman.
Becca.
Jack.
Can we have your final thoughts, please, guys?
Yeah, I mean, the through line of what I've been contributing as much as I can is that I think there's a lot of optimism to be had about the future of how we understand our own fantasies and play, and where technology fits in terms of replacing work and exploring our inner thoughts and how connected we are to them and connected to other people. Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope there.
Great.
I also think as well that I know we're talking a lot about technology and virtual reality, but fundamentally, I mean, the original virtual reality was imagination, and we shouldn't forget that.
Yay! Woo. Thank you, guys. Okay, I think I'm all tangled. So what does everybody think? Do you think that VR is a risk to imagination? Woo.
I really want to go and have a go on that, but I just wanted to say something before we go.
Okay.
Well, I think the thing about like the future of VR and like mind melding with other people is basically pointless talking about it. I mean, no, it's not pointless, but it's gonna be like the singularity where you literally can't predict what will happen afterwards. Because if you can meld with someone else's brain, then you can do anything else to do with brain neural stuff, like applying filters or like curves to an image. You can do the same with brain function stuff, and I'm sure there's loads of really good books by there and like Blade Runner and stuff. So it's really interesting, but I can't form an opinion about it because actually my main opinion is that corporations will do something horrible, basically.
Is that talking about like the ability to empathize with other people and understand their feelings?
Well, it will be exploited for capitalistic purposes, but before anything else, before anyone has a chance to do anything good with it, I think. And I can't predict what will happen after that. I mean, everything's looking so bleak. I think everything's fucked.
Oh my god.
But I really like maybe like an antidote to what you're saying or you're fearing of, everything going in a bleak direction. I really liked what Becky said before leaving. It's like our imaginations are the last, that's the original version of virtual reality, and we shouldn't forget that. And I think that's the kind of virtual reality that we have the control over, and it is limited or limitless, depending on us as individual. And no corporation can monitor that.
I mean, to use their language, that is our real estate. Do you know what I mean? And that's our.
Is that the lingo?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there is a valid point. It's not just about virtual reality or technology, but it's about our whole world. Is so much dictated by the logic of the shareholder and ownership, and private property, corporate property, is the most sacred thing in this world, and that, it's led to where we are, where we've got an amazing possibility and potential for creative growth, but it's hindered by the very thing that has produced that, which is the structure of the world that we live in. But I'm not depressed or like pessimistic about it. I think we also, with that, have the tools to develop a different way of living our lives, which maybe grasps more of our potential as a group rather than just the ones that own everything.
Yeah, that's why I really like open source stuff and having stuff that you can have your own control over. And like you're saying, like our imagination and stuff is our last bit of personal real estate, but it's also, and unlimited, but you could also say it's an unlimited source for people to exploit and like take and use. Like they use our metadata for voting. Imagine if they could just get your neuro interface information, and they'll literally know everything about you. Like stuff that so that's why I like to have control over stuff. That's why I like products where they're like, that there's no extra access to them and stuff like that. I don't know. But I mean, sharing with people is awesome as well. So my problem is that I'm too stupid to understand stuff like internet things. So I wouldn't know who's tracking me, or like when I'm going on a website, I literally don't know. I mean, there's all like apps that can show you what things, what part of the web you are on and who's looking at what you're doing. But yeah, I don't know.
So I guess it's the idea of having agency over what you share and what you don't share with the bigger
I mean,
corporations.
that's why I like the idea of open source, because maybe there'll be communities out there that can, that you know it's safe and yeah, stuff like that.
Until somebody decides to capitalize on that kind of a network of safety, and then
People sell out all the time, so
Sorry, what's open source?
when you make some technology and you make it unlocked so anyone can see how you've made it and they can make their own changes to it. So there's nothing hidden, no secrets. Everything is, you know exactly how this thing works and how it's made.
Right, okay.
Because it comes up in quite a conversation quite a lot about open source. Quite a good analogy, although not a perfect one, is that you're publishing for free a recipe for a cake and not selling the cake.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So anybody can make it and modify it however they want.
Is that anyone could take the recipe, make the cake, but they could also substitute cinnamon for brown sugar and make a slightly different cake.
Right, okay. And there's no
then there's nothing to stop them from distributing that recipe. In principle, the idea is that you don't then monetize that new recipe, or if you do, you at least offer the recipe for free for those who want it, and perhaps you have some added value on top of it, like you give the recipe away for free, but sell a small sample of the cake where you get the analogy kind of breaks down when you get
But
that.
generally it's not monetized usually, or is it?
Yeah, it gets blurry.
Well, the thing is, what it means that the money comes from other sources. So it's not about, like this, in a way, like a lot of software, you buy the software and yeah, that's how the people make the money. But you can make money in other ways. You can like set up a service, for example, like most of the internet is run on open source software, but they still make money because they're selling the ability to move information around and to move the data, but they're not making money from the actual code itself, which has been contributed to by hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Right.
So basically, what's a good example of the open source? Is it like one of those websites where they create like templates for people making their own websites? Is that an example of that, or is that not really?
I think, the most prominent example, though not the one that people can relate to most, is probably the Linux operating system. Maybe an Android smartphone is probably a good point of call. So the Android code, as far as I'm aware, is out there. You can just get it and do stuff with it.
Is that the code for the software?
Yeah, the code for a non-Apple smartphone is generally just there, and you can do stuff with it. But you, in order to use it, you'd have to buy an Android smartphone. So the money comes from like the hardware and not the software.
Okay.
And it's not exactly like that, but it's roughly like that.
Yeah.
And also, do you know about Arduinos? Arduino microcontrollers? They're like, it's an open source electronic device, which is like a computer chip. It's just like a little computer that you can use to control anything, like machinery. You can, basically there's loads of microchips and stuff out there which are open source. So you can look at the schematics and then send away to a factory and they'll make you this microchip that is open source, and you can print it yourself and make it yourself and sell it for money, and it's fine because it's open source, so you don't need the rights for it, and you can also make any changes you want to it. So you can start with the base of this computer, which has already been designed and incremented upon by loads of people in a community. They've all like worked together to make like a really good thing, and then you can add to it, well, like what he said basically, but not with software, but you can apply it to electronics as well.
So in principle, it sounds like really easy, but for somebody who's got no kind of technological background, like for example, someone like me, you give me all this knowledge, I have no idea what to do with it. So I do need to acquire it somehow. I don't know.
For Arduino, there's tons of tutorials for complete beginners.
Why would I want this thing?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, what do you actually do with it?
Well, I mean, you may not necessarily want the Arduino or you want a phone that works, but you're not that bothered about who owns the technology. But then that permeates into everything. Like, for example, the way we set up Talkaoke is we say to people, anyone can do Talkaoke, but the way we make money from it is by actually being the experts in it and advising people, training people, doing the Talkaoke. But the actual idea of how you do it, even though it's credited to us that the people speak, anyone could do. So it's a different thing. It's a different way of seeing culture. It's like the actual form is free for anyone to use, but it's the delivery of the form which you make the money from, and that way anyone can contribute and add to it.
I agree with that, and kind of the concept of doing something, like sharing your skills when you've been doing something for long enough, then you become an expert. Totally, I'm in agreement with that. But it's just like my question is, you talking about something that really quite specific, something that is not easily accessible, but I guess that's also relative because it may not be easily accessible for someone, whatever, who's, I don't know, a painter. They may not think in that way, but someone who's naturally gifted and thinks in technology makes sense, that's a great gift to then take and explore. But in equal measure, someone who's like really kind of technologically oriented, they may not get the intrinsic ways how the Talkaoke works. So
I mean, there's two things. Firstly, it's that open source isn't necessarily to do with technology. That's just sort of a coincidence because the technology movement.
So
Sorry. So that's something else that did. Yeah. So the analogy for the recipe is actually quite it is just an analogy for the whole, but it's also a specific example of open source because a recipe can be an open source, or the design for the Talkaoke table can be open source. A lot of what I do for a living is sort of making videos and editing and things. And actually, what I'd like to do is put all of my rushes online so people could, if they wanted to, and if they were that bored, take my footage and re-edit something to their own spec if they just really wanted to. I haven't got around to doing that. I have no capacity, but that's an idea of it. But also about when it comes to the know-how, generally with the open source movement, there's a propensity to document everything you're doing so that people can do things that they couldn't previously. So again, like the code is always kind of annotated with this bit does this bit does this. And as for why you'd want to, that's dependent on yourself. Yeah, maybe you don't want this Arduino chip, but if you thought one day, you know what, I wish that when I pushed my doorbell, it automatically opened this window, locked my front door, and watered the plant, then you'd think, well, how do I do that? Well, this is where that kind of thing would come in.
Well, so can I just confirm? So open source is a term that can be used like for almost anything. So there's a website that writers can put up scripts, and directors can take those scripts and use it.
It's not a specific thing, an entity. It's a concept.
So it doesn't have to be tech related.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's part of a wider idea about a different way of treating intellectual property. Like the main way, say, media companies make money is by owning the copyright to a film or an image, and then they sell it to people. Like, that's why they get so upset when you download Mad Men or something like that off of Putlocker or something like that, because you're not paying the money, and that's their business model. But other people out there say that ideas can't be owned, or they shouldn't be owned, and that there's a different way of all this knowledge that's been produced should belong to everybody.
So part of this big well that people can just take.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's have a final thought before you go do your thing. Oh, you've done your final thought.
I did it.
It's like a very extended.
Yeah, do you want to have another final thought? Or are you worried that you'll get caught with us forever again?
No, it's cool. My final thought is that I've not really thought about VR, and that's why I'm here, to just have a look at what's going on. And I really liked this short film on there called Sonar. That was really cool because I like the use of it for, just like fun stuff. Really, I don't know what to say actually.
No, that's great. That's great. I think that's something that we've stopped talking about, is that VR can just be something that's entertaining and fun and great, and it doesn't have to be political. Although it does have political music.
But yeah, I like the idea of brain stuff, singularity, and stuff like that. Yeah.
You've returned. Should we have your name and a thought?
Rick. That's not my thought. Yeah, I was just saying pick up what Mikey was saying about there's this thing called Creative Commons license, which is, so artists do get credited, but through, well, it depends how they put this Creative Commons, but they can put a level of how much someone could use their material, like be it a video or a photo or some audio, so people can use it either for their own personal project, or they can, depending on the license, they can mix it, edit it, change it slightly, and then they have to, depending how that's set, they can then put it back up with the similar license or something like that. So it allows for taking all this amazing stuff online and changing
Just
it
putting
slightly.
Into... You do video work, don't you?
I do
yes.
Do you work a lot in like open source kind of stuff?
Using open source software, do you mean?
Yeah. Or like other people's videos or other people's bits and pieces. I think is that what open source? From what I understand, it's taking other people's stuff, but like you're allowed to. Is that how it works?
Depending on the license, you're allowed to do certain things with it.
Right,
so like
okay.
sometimes if it's public domain, you can do whatever you want with it in a way. But like
Okay,
sometimes,
so it's like you can't use Disney characters because they're out of the public domain, aren't they?
yeah, they're registered to Disney. Although sometimes things also there's these. It gets a bit blurry where you get these laws where things can go out of copyright, like if they're 50 years old or depending on the country, if they're not renewed, then video like from the 50s is now public domain unless it's been renewed because it's just publicly owned now because it's
Come over here.
The thing is, when we work a lot with these kind of like well-known archetypes, like Disney characters, I mean, this is a long time ago now, but we made a mural that we got the kids to design in a collective creative experience. They used a lot of like cartoon characters, all of which were owned by various companies. But my argument would be, if all these kids are watching, like for example, SpongeBob SquarePants, for example, or Bugs Bunny, then actually it's actually a kind of collectively owned idea. Like, like the concept of Robin Hood or, I don't know, Sleeping Beauty or something from, that's from an ancient tale. These things are like that. They should actually belong to the public, not to a cartoon company.
Well, I think there's an issue with Disney, isn't there, that they've somehow made like their older cartoons aren't in the public domain by some weird law. How do you feel about that?
I feel like what I feel about the situation is that I think the problem begins when somebody's trying to capitalize on the idea, because what is wrong with sharing your concept that you've developed as an artist? If anything, that should be in theory quite a praise for you if you made a film that everybody wants to watch or edit or whatever software that they want to use. That should be fine. But I think people are just worried they're going to miss out on some remuneration if somebody uses it for free, or if they make more money, or if they adapt it to a higher level enough to then maybe be more associated with the original concept and maybe that's where the fear is.
Like Colonel Sanders, because actually the Colonel himself just got bought out of Kentucky Fried Chicken right at the very, very beginning, and he only made $100 out of it.
Oh my God. But I suppose it works two ways, doesn't it?
In the meantime, well, my alternative example was Kierkegaard, who didn't know he was great until he died, so it was either him or Colonel KFC. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That was about people making it become...
What recipe did he come up with?
It was just this really sad cake with tears and mud. Very.
What is this?
Basically, Kierkegaard was this. Well, it turned out to be quite a philosopher or influence in European philosophy. But he was, as a man, when was he about? 1800s or something, in Norway. He was just a man who thought a lot and like. Sorry, Kierkegaard. But what he came back with was just like a lot of thoughts about kind of life and existence and life being like quite bleak. He was like really unhappily in love with this woman, and then he pursued her. Then he went and became a priest, and then he was just writing his thoughts down, and that kind of formed the base of existentialism.
Right.
I think one of. Yeah. Anyway, influences. Sorry, so that was Kierkegaard. So he didn't know that he was brilliant until much later on in his life. Right. And even then, he didn't know. Oh, so maybe that's not a good example. But anyway, there you go. I've just finished.
No, but I mean, it comes down to this: what is the point of being an artist and making all this content or ideas and producing all this stuff? Yeah, I mean, like, would Soren Kierkegaard see himself as a content provider? Do you know what I mean? If he was around today, I'm a philosophy content provider. Do you know what I mean?
Conceptual artist.
We have someone returning to the table. Are you returning? Is it Raven? Yeah. Is that your name? Do you want to contribute to our conversation about content providing?
What about it?
So we're talking about the idea of open source and like other people using other people's things, but also yeah, I don't even know where to start, 'cause it's been a bit of a mad one. We've suddenly gone into existentialism, which was, I don't know how that happened. But yeah, what do you do? Are you a content provider? Would you mark yourself as that?
I'm a writer, so yeah, that definitely qualifies. And there are different views on it. Like, there is such a thing as co-writing with other people. Especially with the internet now, it's very popular. But the views vary, because I graduated from creative writing, and we talked a lot about that. Some people actually enjoy that co-production and working with other people. But personally, I'm one of those control freaks. I like complete control over my characters and my world and what I do, and no one is allowed in.
Yeah.
So it depends really on the views.
How would you feel about like producing work, like to just release into the ether and like allow other people to edit it and change it and make it their own? Would you feel okay with that, or is that quite a...
I think that's inevitable, because even if you write something and there are other people who interpret it in their own way, you can never completely have control over how people perceive what you've written, how they understand it, and what conclusions they draw from it. So yeah, as long as, like I said, well, co-production is not my thing, because I like control completely, but that's something I created, has my name on it, it's completely mine. But once it's out of the world, I guess that's what makes it alive and makes it important that other people kind of change it, how they perceive it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I was reading something interesting recently about how Paramount, I'm going to get tricky, Paramount were trying to copyright the Klingon language, because Paramount and CBS, I think it was the other one or something, because they were saying that the language, it was made with Star Trek, but it was, yeah, but that was interesting, because obviously Star Trek is not, it's obviously owned by someone, but then this language that was made in this universe, who owns the copyright to that? And so people are trying to learn it and stuff, and they're saying, no, you can't, this is ours. And it's like, no, well, no, it's open, it's a language.
Isn't that something that was extended upon by the community, though? Didn't
yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, someone did make it for one of the Star Treks in, I think, 90s or something, so it actually became a kind of language. It wasn't just random words. But now, yeah, so that's a weird, interesting one. So who owns that? But it's kind of, I think they're fighting a losing battle. I think it's quite an open language now, which people of the community, Star Trek community, have made dictionaries and stuff like that. So that's quite an interesting one.
I feel like the minute you've shared your content and you've kind of put it out there, it kind of takes on a life of its own. I think you kind of have to allow
that. I mean, it's sort of like, ask some questions about what culture actually is and who owns it. Does anyone own it? Is it collectively owned? Do you know what I mean? Who owns, like, the idea of Batman? Do you know what I mean? Obviously it's owned by, was it Marvel or DC? But, like, someone could know and understand Batman without ever having seen a DC comic or a film. Do you know what I mean? And Batman as an idea is out there. Do you know what I mean? Or anything like that. Like all of these things which are products that are, but it's our culture. It's like even things like, I don't know, like, away from comics, like the Premier League is copyrighted, do you know what I mean? And things like that. Football, Manchester United is a brand, but, who really owns these things? Could it even be, is it even right to talk about owning it at all?
Yeah.
I think corporate companies get funny about it when they actually, it's more when someone else starts making money out of it, really. That's when they start having an issue with it, and it's people are fine to like take some music and maybe make do a personal project with someone's music, but the moment they start then re-advertising it, then the companies will come in and say, hang on, that's our music, you can't work with it, kind of thing.
But there's a weird line between where does it stop being someone else's? Like 50 Shades of Grey was originally Twilight fan fiction, so does Twilight own that? Hi.
Yeah, there's that, and copyright issues are generally about money making and everything, but about creation, because with the whole DJs and remix culture, they had to reintroduce the whole concept of taking someone else's work and using it in order to create your own. For example, in poetry, there is also such a thing as found poetry, where you take other texts and phrases from them and arrange in your own way. So you're taking something else as a source that someone else owns the rights to, and you should kind of quote it and everything, but you create your own thing using that. So there's a lot of that in creative world.
That's the issue. Where does that end, though? Like in novels, there's everywhere. There's intertextuality, different things interacting with different things, music, whatever.
I think also what that made me think of, what you just said, is like taking phrases and words and thoughts and kind of recontextualizing them. That's kind of how propaganda works a little bit. It's a bit scary. But I'm sure you can use it for like creative purposes as well. Just kind of reposition words and create your own poetry. I think that's quite an interesting concept. In fact, I use that concept in my piece. So
But how can you? That's an issue, though. How do you own? Can you own words? Do you own a phrase? Do you own it? When does it become, I don't know, too abstract to own?
Well, I mean, maybe even the concept of ownership itself is a little bit tricky. It doesn't really work with things that are not like, I can own this phone, but actually I don't own the way that it works, or all the data is actually owned by Google, because if I lose this, I just download all that information again from some server in California. But like, it's so like all my whole life is up there on Facebook, effectively owned by Facebook. But do they really own the record of my life? Do you know what I mean? And do I even think about it? I'm just living it. Do you know what I mean? When on my deathbed, I'm not going to be like sort of passing that on to somebody else. There might be maybe my money, but not like this story of my life.
Yeah.
I was reading about something which is kind of live streaming of funerals. Actually, just made me think of that, and
live
also
streaming of funerals.
Yeah, for people who couldn't make it.
Oh, not just for the world. Like, can anyone access it, or is it?
I don't actually know, but apparently there's a website somewhere in Scandinavia. Well, funnily enough, that's where Kierkegaard was born, and that you can connect to like a live streaming of funeral, and then you can. And then, sorry, they were saying something about once somebody dies, you can actually you can pass on the information they've generated all throughout their lives, and then they were thinking about creating. I mean, this is like fiction, but future fiction. But they were thinking about creating gravestones which can talk to you, because they would contain all the information or downloadable information from the dead person, and then you can go there, sit there, and you know how in films you see like a child goes to the mother's grave and like, oh mom, this, that. It's a one-sided conversation, but they're saying you can have a conversation based on the behavioral patterns and information that person who died generated in their life.
But they're currently looking at putting that into robots, but is that still the same?
Could you download someone's life and then carry it on in a way?
Yeah, that's
robots.
They're actually working on that at the moment. But that's not a person living, it's just kind of a person to interact with, do you know what I mean? Like, it's for everyone else. It's weird.
I actually read a sci-fi novel last year which had a bit where a person could upload their self, in a sense, to some system where if you die, your friends and relatives can access you and talk to you, and eventually everyone ends up with a different version of that person, because it interacts with the way you interact, and how you can adjust to how you remember that person and all that. So that is an idea that it's interesting to know that it's actually in some form it exists, kind of.
Would anybody want to, what do you think, would you want to be like uploaded after you die? Or want your friends and family to be?
I don't know, I'm not too sure. I'm kind of thinking, is it moral, is it right to sort of try and preserve someone in that sort of way? Because I guess it's not really them.
Yeah.
And also, is it giving you this sort of, it's giving your friends and family this full sense of like, maybe not security, because obviously they know you've like gone, but just this false feeling of happiness and I don't know.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
I don't know what I
to
think.
Deal with it.
Yeah, it's like trying to avoid the problem. And I think, I don't know. I am actually quite like that. Like, I don't want to think about death and things like that. Like, I don't want to talk about that. But but I don't think that's right. I think we should, deal with things.
I feel like it's more for the people that are left alive rather than the person who's actually going.
Yeah, it kind of becomes a commodity in the sense of like, for instance, I'm too scared of welcoming the thought that somebody just passed away. So in order for me to feel better or more okay with that situation, I'm just gonna kind of pretend that didn't happen. I'm just gonna access this thing where I can. But the funny thing is, with death, like after time, you just forget.
Yeah.
And it's actually fine.
Is it healthy, do you think, to pretend?
Well, I think there could be like a sort of like, for example, people don't delete, well, maybe they can't, but generally dead people's Facebook pages stay up there. People post on them as well, especially on the anniversary of their death, like missing you or something like that. And actually, there's some people on my Facebook page that I didn't even realise had died until the anniversary of their death. And I just saw these posts. I mean, like very tenuous people that I've met. Do you know what I mean? And it becomes more and more of a graveyard. But I personally don't see anything. I think that's quite a good thing in a way. And some of the people that have died before that, it's a shame in a way that they're not on there too. I think it's quite a nice thing that they can just exist, not as a living entity, but just as a page and and
still
you can
kind of part of the community.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it could be a virtual thing that you experience in an online situation, but using virtual reality. I'm kind of I don't think I would mind being uploaded.
What if they made you like a robot? Would you feel different about that? Like that was pretending
so I have
to be
visions
you.
of this crazy robot running around. I guess that's also another issue with like if people are then made into robots that would then populate where you'd have millions upon millions of robots that would just exist in this world. It would be so much. Where would they be? And it'd just be you'd have overpopulation with robots and.
But they wouldn't take any resources. Well, I suppose they would, like metal and power and stuff.
Yeah, I guess. And then there would be issues with that, I guess.
Yeah.
But virtually, I don't see an issue with it. Yeah, where people can.
What do you mean by virtually? Like on a computer, that's okay, or like?
Well, I mean a virtual world that exists online or something. Whatever it's going to be in the future, there'll be this online world.
Right.
Where people can go and experience things. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's quite a nice idea.
Yeah. Like Facebook, but in a bigger.
Like a VR Facebook.
Yeah, VR Facebook.
But about the Facebook thing, actually, a few years ago, I saw a thing floating around Facebook. Like if I basically people talking about how they should write into their will that if I die, someone please delete my Facebook account and leaving passwords there and everything. But a thought that just occurred to me, because I had a few friends just generally delete Facebook account for various reasons. What also disappears is all the comments they made on your photos, and you're left with this awkward replies to something that don't really make sense anymore. So yeah, you could ask someone, entrust your password to delete your Facebook account, but you're taking away something else from other people, and should you be doing that?
Yeah, that's really.
I just want to say the poet John Donne famously said, "No man is an island," and it's actually a poem about a funeral. And actually, I don't know if this is the case, but as far as he was concerned, a funeral is a public event. And he famously said, "Send not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Like the bell is not ringing for the dead person, it's ringing for the living person. And in a way, the same with it, like your presence, your online presence, is there as a reminder, as a kind of footprint of what you've left, and it belongs then to the. I don't think you've got a right to remove that, actually. I think that belongs to the people at large.
That's your contribution to the world.
Yeah, exactly. That is your footprint.
With Facebook, it actually does stay there. If you delete your account, it does stay there, because if you go back on, it kind of all reappears still. So it doesn't really. Someone's still storing it.
Can you actually delete your Facebook, or can you just deactivate it?
You can deactivate it. I don't know. I don't know how you delete it. Actually, I don't know if they actually will delete it or not. If you.
I'll come to you, I just said I'd go to Margot, because you had your hand up.
I had my hand up, but I've forgotten what it was now. But
in that case, what you do is just rewind the previous points, and then Margot will remember.
Rewind the previous points.
If you remember.
God, Facebook, how
Deleting
it's
the account.
everybody's. It
There was
belongs to
something about
everybody.
funerals that you were talking about. I was kind of maybe thinking about whether death will be possible
No
in the
Man's an
future. No Man's an Island, and yeah, and a kind of funeral being the public event, and maybe Facebook being your public face that you don't own. So maybe you will never die effectively or something. I don't know.
guess
I
as
don't
long
know.
as
I just had
Facebook's
like a strand of like various thoughts, and I just lost the track. But yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer that you sort of can delete a Facebook account, but if you log back in, it all kind of restores. So there's that, just answering the question, yeah. And to the whole death idea, I think it's changed a lot in general, because back in the heavy Christian day, there was no such connection to the body. Like now we really put a lot of emphasis on the body and burying the body. It used to be that the family just comes in, says goodbye to the spirit, and you leave to the monks or to whoever deal with the body. But now we do have that connection, so the perception changed, and it's changing still, because we're not necessarily conventionally just bury people. Now, for example, there's a thing going around on the internet that you can become a tree when you die. They sort of change you into this urn from which a tree will grow. So the concept of death and how we die and how we perceive it, it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, I think because there's such an emphasis on the body, because the spirit is kind of preserved now, I guess, in the Facebook and the blogs and everything that everybody has. Anybody want to talk about that?
I don't know. What's interesting to me is like the concept of the body and like how we are perceived. It's interesting because I think over 50% of photos posted on the internet by teenagers are selfies, and I think it's just interesting how our relationship with the body and with the image of ourselves is kind of available online, because you kind of on the internet, I don't think we're fully the people that we actually are, because we only post the pictures that we like of ourselves. But maybe, I don't know, do people post funeral selfies? I don't know. Apparently they do, actually.
I don't know, I think there's quite a lot missing from the public persona.
I don't think they do now, but there was an era where they would take pictures of dead relatives and post them as if they're living, so that existed a while. So yeah, I don't think we do that now.
Certainly in my family, it's like a thing of like taking pictures of dead people. It's a little bit morbid, to say the least, but people just do it. And then, when you've got like your photo album with stuff, you just go, oh yeah, and there's a wedding, oh yeah, there's our dog, oh yeah, there's a dead granddad.
I guess the Facebook's kind of...
But I'm saying, like, what's wrong with that? It was a body, it was a body, that's what it looked like in its final stages. Fair enough, we're all gonna die, don't worry about it.
I can't remember which culture it is, but isn't there a group of people that live with the dead relative for a year or something?
No, but isn't it one of the reasons why Ebola spread so quickly is one of the kind of burial rituals is that you kind of sit with that body, the body of your deceased relative is present with you in the room.
There are community cultures that live with the dead relative for. I was just adding to the whole.
The funeral death conversation.
But yeah, maybe we can get around that with virtual reality. I don't know.
What do you mean?
Well, instead of you can bury the body and then the person
you can
exists
have it virtual.
In virtual, so you get rid of the disease issue.
That's a great idea. We should work on that. Can I swap with someone now? Because I've got to go in a minute and I'm getting really hot.
Oh yeah, final thought. Yeah.
Everything has an end. Maybe it's time just to get some final thoughts.
Yeah, guys, let's get some final thoughts. Let's start with you.
I don't mind when I die, if I'm in a virtual world and people can access me that way.
But not a robot.
Yeah, I'm not so sure on the robot. Yeah.
Okay. Raven?
About the whole us existing online and the posting images only of what we like. So I guess it's a part of, now we have more ways of creating ourselves, and we're creating gradually those virtual selves. But do we own it? That's a question maybe not to be answered.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't mind if someone were to sort of own me virtually and even make a robot out of me, like after I'd gone. But I don't think it's very healthy for the people who are doing it. But me, I do what you want.
Because you won't care, because if you know more, then it doesn't actually matter. Unless your downloadable brain cares, I don't know.
What's your final thought?
I don't know. I'd like to see a funeral in a virtual reality. Maybe it'll be like really beautiful and everybody will look gorgeous.
I've never really understood the whole funeral thing. Certainly if I was died in a slow, like terminal disease kind of way, I would definitely try and arrange my funeral before I died, just to get that kind of like last boost of like, hopefully people would come. I would hand the project management over to someone else, but I would definitely be there. Do you know? I don't really understand why people wait until they're dead to have a funeral.
A comedian that said the line, I can't remember the line exactly, but it was along the lines that he was going to miss. So funerals are always good because people always say good things about the people that have died, but he said, shame I'm going to miss the best one, which was obviously meaning his, and I can't remember his. Bob Monkhouse, that was it, yeah. So that was just what I was interested. Yeah, it just reflected to that. Yeah.
I think that's a lovely end thought. Oh, we've got more
just very
thoughts.
quickly on what you said, just like project manage your final months of your life. I was having a conversation with somebody last night, and it was about David Bowie, how he was aware of his time kind of, leaking out, and he kind of lined up all his projects, kind of crammed them in, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna end on the up, and he did.
Imagine
like creatively, but I'm not trying to qualify it, but it just like.
Yeah.
Whereas Prince was very sudden.
And Freddie Mercury actually arranged for a Christmas present to arrive to Elton John after he was dead already. He prearranged it all and yes.
That's amazing. I'd love to do that. Okay, I'm going to hop out. I don't know how to do this. Thanks, guys. Woo!
Hello, everybody at Hackstock and Sci Fi London. We're about to start, as Mikey said, an experimental event today. It's going to be a Talkaoke and dialogue mashup. Would love you guys to come and be a part of it. Today's theme is going to be body and identity, same or different. So, have we got our speakers?
Speakers, get your ass down here. Get your body down.
Get your body down. Okay. So, just to explain it a little bit, you can see that everybody's sat in a circle around here, and we'd love to get you guys to come and join it. We've put a few chairs on the outside and on the inside as well. So come and join the dialogue, and the idea is we've invited people from different backgrounds here to talk about the idea of body and identity, yeah? And what we have here as well is a cup and string telephone, just to show people who's talking to who, in addition, for example, to the microphone. And we're going to start it all off. We're going to get the speakers 5 minutes each to talk about who they are, why they've been invited to speak today on the theme of body and identity, and their opinion on same or different. We're going to do this a couple of rounds, and then we'd love you guys to get involved with the conversation. Okay. So, my name is Dr. Shama Rahman, and I run a science and arts company called Jugular Productions, and we put on these cross-disciplinary salons called Dialogue, and as we mentioned today, we're teaming up with Talkaoke. So I'd like to start with Catherine Lewis, who's going to tell us a little bit about herself and her stance.
Okay. Hello, thank you. My name is Catherine Templar Lewis, and I am a scientist and performer and a writer for Vice, Vice Motherboard, and Vice Broadly, the new feminist channel for women who know their place. So yes, come join everybody. Come talk about body and identity. Was my 5 minutes started? Oh yeah. Okay, now my 5 minutes started. Okay, so what did I want to say briefly? Body and identity. Okay, to me, body is an interesting one because I come from a biology background. I was a geneticist, which means two things to me. Body is determined biologically, but also because it's determined genetically, every single body is different and unique. What I find interesting is the way that biology and the body and gender and identity is seen very often to be the same thing. There's a complete lack of ability, especially if you look at the education system, to separate identity, body and gender and biology. I think especially in terms of the way people are taught, you're going to get into a real barrel of worms, and that's already started because, of course, they're not the same thing. Body in terms of how you identify and change your body is completely different to your genetics and your biology. So you can have genetics saying you have one type of body, and then on top of that you have that how that is expressed through your environment and how you grow up. And then on top of that, you have how you choose to express and change your body. What's great is this whole sort of rising of sort of cyborgs and artificial ways to change your body. I mean, this has always been done since tribal times, when actually the way you change your body, whether it's with scarification or adornment, has always been around. We're now at the level, though, where we literally can change it on a molecular level, we can enhance it. We're moving into this whole, I mean, cyborgs in a sense exist already today, obviously, but where will this go in the future? So we have biology in terms of body in terms of biology, body in terms of how you change it, how it's expressed, and the third thing is identity, body, and your mind. And this is where virtual reality comes in. So who's Hackstock? Of course, we can now completely change our body in terms of avatars, how we feel. There's an amazing organization called Be Another Lab, whereby people are doing gender swapping. It's great in terms of how it makes you feel and how people are sort of breaking down barriers to how they see themselves. And it's also complemented in neuroscience, where we've seen that there is no such thing as a male or female mind. Everybody is completely different, which again throws into this argument that we need more terms. We need terms that are more fluid and terms that aren't constrained by biology. Because even neuroscience is showing us that every single person is different. And so this whole celebration of diversity is very important in the way that we move forward in body image and identity in the future.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Catherine. I'd like to pass it on to, am I right in saying Chimaran?
Chimaran, yeah.
Chimaran, here we go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chimaran, and I'm from Versatile Consulting, and we've created the first online course to help brands learn how to take emerging technologies such as virtual reality, wearable technologies, and integrate them to extend their product strategies or integrate them into their marketing strategies. And so very much looking at how these types of technologies can be used as an extension. And I think that body and identity are not related as such, is because, it used to be that you had to physically, be with someone to communicate with them. I need to be in physical proximity to talk to you. But now we have, the telephone. We've moved on from this version, thank God. We have the internet with social media, and then of course with virtual social worlds, etc. You can now basically have mind-to-mind communication that transcends both time and space and physical body. And so then if you think about your identity of who you are and how you're communicating when you're no longer tied to being in this body, or even you can still have your message read at a different time point. So and I think technologies such as virtual reality are really kind of going to change how much is this physical body you're in related to who you are or who you want to be. So I really liked what you said about the transgender. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I was born in the wrong body. Well, maybe you don't need to be tied in that body, and if your identity was your body, then you wouldn't have those sort of things come about where they feel like they're not in the right body. Or another thing I kind of thought about was, you can put on costumes.
Yeah.
And you're wearing the costume for the day, and, I could dress up like the Queen of England, and I'm still never going to be the Queen of England, especially not with this accent. So your identity is, you can put on any avatar or costume or persona that you like, but then it still comes down to, who you are. And and they found that I think it's like every 7 years, every single cell in your body is not the same cell that it was 7 years ago. So if you really were your physical body, then that wouldn't be possible. And they found as well that your physical body can be changed and influenced down to the DNA information based on your experiences. So who you were originally could very much change and evolve as you have different influences. And I'm very excited to see with virtual reality how that is going to change how people choose to express their identity in a different way. So
cool. Awesome. Thank you, Shamaran. Mikey, would you like to talk?
I think I'd probably like to just hear more what other people say. I do really agree with this point. The two points that I really resonate with is that, there's so many different elements to what we normally think of as gender, and I think that's just something which there's no real language for. It's so just like boy, girl, and we're only just coming to terms with transgender, but actually there's a whole universe of different behaviours, body identities, approaches, performances as well, that I don't think we have, especially in common terms, have the language for, and it's a shame because it's a great universe out there. That's all I want to say, really.
Amazing. You get a little. Daniel.
Hiya. Hello, my name's Daniel. I am writing a book, which is largely my entry into this is kind of from the gender and identity side. So I'm writing a. There we are. I'm writing a book which is called How to Borrow Your Girlfriend's Orgasm. So it's essentially trying to start off from a point where, as a guy, I was trying to think of a concept that would appeal to other guys, where we could kind of go, hey guys, we've got something genuine to learn from women. And as I was doing research for for the book over the last, it's true, it's actually true. Yeah. So as I was doing research over the last, looking at how things have changed over the last 50 years, I kind of got a sense that women have been much more open to changing their identity and have kept up with a world which is increasingly becoming dependent on large social networks and some of these things which men have struggled with a little bit more. And in fact, over the last 50 years, there's some very interesting things that have happened if you look at our culture. So I'll just give you one of my best examples, which is from a very useful tool called Google Ngrams, which allows you to look at the frequency of words used in published books which Google has collected. So it looks at millions of books and compares the words. This gives you a little insight into the kind of concepts that have become more important at different times. So, for example, before any turn of the century in 1999 or 1899, people start writing about apocalypse the whole time because they think the world's going to end. But what was kind of interesting on this note is if you look over the last 50 years, there's been a complete change from the 60s, 70s onwards, particularly in British fiction. When you look at words like mother and father, when you look at words like inside and outside, which are more tenuously connected to these concepts, but and you look at words which are typically used by women more when they write. So you can analyze a lot of books and see that I think men are more likely to use certain propositions like for and to, whereas women are more likely to use, and again, this only works on when you're looking at millions of books, you can't talk about individuals. They're more likely to use and with and certain things like this. So in the 60s, 70s, you can see that for the first time, father was always used more often than mother up until that point, and it actually swaps over. And this was such an exciting thing for me to discover, because I kind of thought, I wonder if that happened before I typed it in, and then I typed it in, and the correlation was exactly as I was kind of hoping that it might be if it was indicating this kind of change. So I've kind of been looking at those kind of issues and trying to approach it from the point of view of, hey, let's pretend there's really something to learn in a way that I kind of feel that we pretend that we're very much open to learning from women. It's kind of this background thing of, yeah, we can have the right language, but if we look around us and, for example, we don't have prime ministers who are women, we don't have people in position of authorities who are women, there's a kind of underhand message which contradicts everything that you're told in a kind of politically correct situation. So yeah, basically I'm kind of looking at all of that. I'm very interested in what Catherine mentioned about the gender swapping as a kind of experience. I've been working with Olivier on a particular project which he'll tell us about, I think. And yeah, looking to see which things can be learned, because I don't think that I think that identity you can kind of escape from those things. So I've been working out myself what is part of my kind of body, what's part of my identity, and what things are just in my mind sort of prisons that actually you can just step out of and start using yourself, kind of thing. So my goal is to create a world in which I feel slightly freer to express my whole personality, basically, and that's the kind of basis of my research. Well.
Thank you. Awesome. We're coming to Olivier, and you can see what we're projecting up there. Okay, right then it changed. Actually, okay, right there it changed again. Are a series of photographs that Olivier has done of himself as iconic women. And he's actually got some physical photos of them on the side as well. So this is a prime example of body and identity. Same or different?
Hi, I'm Olivier. Okay, I'm a bit nervous, so you'll have to forgive my shakiness. I think this talk is really interesting, because anything to do with gender or with identity or both is always fascinating, I think. I mean, this project stems from a gender identity issue that I had when I was a little boy. So basically I was born a little boy, but I didn't want to be a little boy. I wanted to be a glamorous woman. I didn't want to be a little girl. I didn't want to push a pram. I didn't want to play with dolls. I wanted to be the glamorous woman, so I wanted to be a Hitchcock blonde, and I wanted to smoke slim cigarettes and be very elegant and blah, blah, blah. But of course, I'm not that. So I kind of created this dream alter ego called Olivia the Gold Tree. She's got a biography, she's got an entire identity, and in her story she was a model, hence the reason why she's styled in different ways. All of them are actually inspired by all the actresses and the movies that I really liked. So you've got the Hitchcock blondes, and then the one in the middle is kind of inspired by Sharon Stone, so people like that, the femme fatales and so on. I thought it would be quite interesting to do that, to push that further. So there is a sequel coming soon, but it's not just about me turning into a woman, it's me turning into all the members of her family. So I've turned myself into her half-brother, the mother, the father, and so on and so on. I just think identity in general is fascinating, who we are, what do we think of ourselves, what's our place in the world, knowing that society is a construct, so it plays a lot with identity. And with Daniel, we're actually about to do something. We're going to create Daniel's female alter ego. So there you go. But this is it for now. So I'll just move on to the next person.
Thank you. Okay, you do get a gong out. Thanks very much.
Cool. Hi, my name's Rowan. I'm just kind of a spectator and contributor to this conversation. One thing I'd like to it's just an observation I made actually. The first time I walked into this building, it sort of touches on something Catherine was saying earlier. And I notice this whenever I see it. Has anyone been to the toilet here?
To the what?
Has anyone been to the toilet here?
No, not yet.
It is and it isn't. It's confusing because it's not normal, but it's basically all gender-neutral cubicles.
Perfect.
And this touches on what Mikey was talking about the inflexibility of sort of the language and the terminology. I find one of the problems with talking about gender issues is the fact that we have terminology where maybe there doesn't need to be terminology.
Right.
Like boys and girls, as we've established, is a social distinction. So by just getting rid of that and not gendering toilets, you sort of mitigate some of those issues altogether without having to create like 5 different varieties of toilet, whatever it might be. I've got nothing really more sophisticated on that matter. I just kind of wanted to get the ball rolling by just pointing that out.
Unless it's an anatomical thing, like a lot of the times you get urinals in a male.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I can see that. But again, it doesn't really need to be labelled as anything as such. It's just look here. If you don't mind getting it out there, you can go, or you can have your private cubicle. Personally, I think actually everyone on Earth would prefer if it was all private cubicles. But
Absolutely.
maybe not. I don't
probably didn't want to get out there. Yeah. Carl, you had something to say as well.
Hey, I'm Carl, so I'm kind of a creative technologist futurist, so I think a lot about the future, maybe too much. And I think identity is it's just the brain creating neuronal pathways as it pushes through existence, right? So you could be born anywhere and you would create an identity of whatever you have, and to identify yourself with a sex is no different than to identify yourself with a nation. You had got the lottery of being born wherever you were going to be born, and people can identify themselves with that, and to identify yourself with sex is you're just a hormone. The only reason why you would have an X chromosome is because you had a hormone that kind of pushed your clitoris out into a dick. Whoopsie-doo. You know, like it's just it's no different from being any other sort of kind of human.
Yeah.
And so identity really kind of comes from like how society might sort of maybe push you into these kind of things, or however you sort of talk to people as you kind of go through. And
so that's where you make the distinction there. I mean, the body thing is a hormonal, physical thing, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah, the brains are no different. I mean, we were just saying how how there's no difference between a male and a female brain. Neuroscience has completely proven that. That was what they came out like 3 weeks ago or something. And that means that there is no difference between male and female brains. So it's literally just in the hormones. Did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Finish your point. Okay, finish your point. Okay, but yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm wanting to do, because I can code and I'm very interested in biohacking. I think I'm going to move on to that after virtual reality. After I've done some bits, I want to go into biohacking.
Yeah.
CRISPR is incredibly exciting, and I
really
like
Oren Katz and people like that.
Sorry?
A bit like Oren Katz and people like that when they're doing biohacking.
Biohacking with cats.
Oren Katz.
Oren Katz.
Oren? He's an artist. He's a bio artist, essentially.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, is that the guy that did the arm on the ear on his arm?
Yeah. Well, he worked with them. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
He's come over from Australia and he's now here. So he was in the last dialogue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think another guy. He's amazing. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, kind of like that. I mean, I wanted to get like a jellyfish DNA and to be able to splice it with myself using CRISPR to put it in there and
using
CRISPR to get like the it's a. You can take bits of DNA out and you can replace it. It uses bacteria to sort of slice out bits of DNA. It's quite difficult to do in adults at the moment, but it's possible. And so that means in the future we are going to be able to change our DNA as we're alive. And if you did change your DNA, like in particular, I quite like the idea of getting jellyfish DNA and splicing it out of mine so I can glow in the dark. It would probably end up only being on my fingernails, my lips, and my hair, but I would glow in the dark.
Yeah.
And I would have then created an entire new species of human.
With glow-in-the-dark fingernails.
Yeah, exactly. And then it would be like, wow. And so now I could I could suffer almost speciesism from people. You know, it's not even like sexism or racism. This would be are people going to dislike me because I glow in the dark? And like, oh, I can't breathe. Can I breathe now because I glow in the dark? And you're gonna muddy the genetics of humans and
you're
stuff.
Gonna have glow-in-the-dark babies, easy to find. Yeah.
And I think it would open up a discussion on genetic modification and stuff like that. But I guess there's one last point. I'll move on now.
Absolutely,
but I think with virtual reality, how it can help people change their identity. There's like a guy that I was reading about on Reddit recently, how he had massive social anxiety issues, and when he went into virtual reality and went into alt space, he would go into a party that was there, and he would normally play like World of Warcraft and stuff, and he'd be fine with that. He wouldn't get social anxiety. But now suddenly, the social anxiety's back, and he's like this other character, and he's like, whoa, I'm gonna have to talk to people, you know, and it's like they're sitting down, and it's like, and then he realized, actually, it's not me. I can go and change my character if I want. It's okay. And so he started training himself, and if it did go wrong, he could just go back out and change his character and come back in, and he's like a different ogre. And so it helped him train it. And so I think if people do have some things of identity that they're scared of, they can try it out, and they can see, do I work better with this kind of character, with this identity?
Yeah.
So VR is going to be amazing for that.
I just wanted to come back to jellyfish again, but supposedly it's within them that we can look at the secrets of immortality, because there's certain types of jellyfish that keep going from baby state of pupa back to adult stage and back to pupa again. So they could carry on doing that forever, technically. So, you know, if we can think about a near future where something like that could be possible for humans, maybe not by splicing with jellyfish necessarily, but would you know, the different sexes disappear altogether because we possibly won't need to procreate any longer?
I like the idea of maybe...
have sex, that's different, but...
Yeah, I think I'd rather be more like a spider plant, and I'll just make lots of little versions of myself.
Oh, right, yeah.
So maybe I'll splice myself with a jellyfish and a spider plant, and then I don't need you lot. I can just make my own species and go...
Oh, there you go. Yeah, be a snail.
You can insult, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. Oh,
nice. I'm going to send my spores out into space. Now I'm going to populate Mars before any of you do.
It's X-rated today. Mikey?
No, just sort of riffing off what Carl was saying, that really identities personas are performed. I mean, this is one thing you learn in live art school.
Yes.
And it's all performed, so in a way the virtual space is a perfect place to perform different identities and to try out identities and see what works for you and what doesn't. I don't really believe there's a kind of essential you that is kind of like in the middle there. It's just like different guises that you're comfortable with, and you can play different guises. And just going to the, you know, the sex thing, I think you would always have sexes because sex might not be that fun without the sexes, if you see what I mean. You need the sexes for sex, or maybe you don't. I don't know.
Maybe you don't. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about that sort of fluidity.
Just about what he said, I do feel like it can be more like a pie chart rather than masks. So when people have identity or parts of their personality, people sometimes think it's a mask, and then maybe, oh, there's the soul who is the real thing behind. No, really, actually, all of this is part of a pie chart of the whole, and you can concentrate on more parts of your identity or more parts of your existence, and the more you focus on it, the more it becomes part of the whole of you.
That's actually quite a nice, comforting thought, kind of going, oh, what is my real identity? I don't know. That's all of it, yeah.
I was just going to come back on that because it made me think that one of the things that kids or teenagers are generally speaking much better at than adults is exactly trying on these masks. So I work with kids who are musicians and stuff, and one week they'll be sort of looking like a goth, and the next like a prime minister, and the next they change identity much more easily, and if it doesn't work, then they throw it off, kind of thing. And as you get older, it becomes harder to do that because people get a bit offended by it sometimes, or you get more scared to do it, or you're more tied down to the things that you've already committed to, and so
society expects it of you. Like, I want to know who Daniel is when I meet him.
Exactly. You want to know that it's the same Daniel that's going for coffee that agreed to go to coffee, kind of thing. So I just wanted to put the question there, like, is this going to change perhaps the authority between the generations as adults we all start to admit that we haven't actually explored all the multiple different parts of our personality that we want to explore, and we see that there are actually a new generation of people coming up who now talk about gender fluidity much more easily than we do, and who find the whole bathroom thing a complete stupid nonsense and stuff like that. Just an idea.
Thanks. I was just going to actually follow on from that, because what tends to be a common thread is this combining of body and identity. And actually, when you separate those, suddenly something happens, because body is its constraints are your genetics. We have human species bodies that are adapted to an environment.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you have your own personal body, which is shaped by the environment you grow up in, so that can affect the way we look. Then you have identity, but actually the only constraint on identity, and you can use your body, whether it's clothes, adornment, scarring, or whether it is, bio-splicing of genes in, or hacking your body. The only constraint actually becomes society and its expectations and the cultural expectations you put on it. But if you separate, and I hope we get to the stage where identity and body are completely separated, and body is just a biological thing, and identity is how you use it, and many other aspects of yourself, not constrained by society. And within that, you can change your body, as many times as you like. It is completely fluid. Yes, you have some restraints, and you'll always be so high and things like that. But in terms of the expression of identity, body just becomes another tool, like clothes and language and things like that.
Like a tool to get you from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But in fact, I wanted to bring you in on this, Shamiran. I hope I'm saying your name right.
Yes, you are.
In terms of if the only constraint that we've got is society, what you're working on is technology as an extension, and what are your thoughts about how its role in changing society and its sort of propensity to try and keep you to a specific identity?
Well, I think it's kind of, I think it was, you were saying that you used to have a Second Life profile, and you had you had multiple characters. So as you mentioned, you could have a male, a female character, and you said you had an androgynous character. And
the character looked like me, but just slightly more female. And didn't sort of wore kind of very kind of baggy, loose clothes. But I just want to add to this thing, the idea of identity. To me, you're describing it as a visual thing, but I think there's also a behavioural, performative element, which I'm actually more interested in than what clothes they wear or how people appear.
Yeah.
But actually the performance of these different identities.
But I was going to say what it is in Second Life is you can go to this other world where you're not, constrained by the cultural, things that might be in the real world. But it still carries over. A lot of it is, what is going on here might be a little bit freer in that aspect. But if the culture is still going to shame someone, they might hide as, with a different name or avatar, but then they still might, if the culture is not going to be accepting, they might not admit, oh, this is Shamiran and I'm, a half lizard person. They're not going to want to admit it if it's not going to be accepted. So I think, even if we have a virtual world, it needs to be used as a tool to help people empathize and explore different aspects of their personality so that they could then learn to accept other people's personalities. So somebody's
an element of non-shaming and all of that. Yeah.
Just allowing other people who maybe they're, racist or homophobic or whatever, but if they're able to have an experience, a very experiential, emotionally moving experience through this medium of what would it be like if I didn't win the genetic lottery and I was born into a disformed body, or I was born into a culture where I didn't have, money to, get an education or, and et cetera. And then if they're able to have that empathetic experience and then maybe almost live in the shoes of someone else, explore different aspects of their personality, then they could potentially be more open to accepting other people who, have different, opinions or have different life circumstances than their own.
They're doing that a little bit already, right? With the UN, they did a VR experience of a little girl trying to hide from her killer, essentially. And everybody got very immersed into that situation, and they were like, right, well, this is why we need to help this particular group of people, sort of thing.
Exactly. So I think allowing people to really walk in the shoes of someone else will help, and then it gives this whole other world to then explore, different lives. You're born into this life, but why not try out another one?
Yeah. Jazz, did you have anything to comment on?
I was just talking to my partner this morning. She's applying for a residency as an artist at CERN.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And she was just talking to me about particles which are called strings that make up things like atoms and neutrons and things like that. And she said, do you realise I've got a male and female end? And I'm going...
A male and female...
End.
N.
Yeah,
okay.
end. There's a male end and there's a female end.
Right, yeah.
To these little strings that make up the universe.
Right.
And I'm going, so gender is actually a fundamental thing in the universe then?
Oh, wow. Yeah,
it's to do with electric charge, I think, to some degree, positive or negative.
So it's more of a name that's been assigned.
Yeah, but hold on. There is a reason why she said male and female rather than negative and positive.
Right, yeah.
And she said it's because of the way these things join up to make something new.
Okay.
So you can have an electron and a proton, for example, orbit each other, but it doesn't mean anything new is going to get created from that relationship.
Yeah.
But when you get something male and female together and it leads to the birth of something new, a conception that gives labour, if you like, into the world, then it turns out that's what these strings do. The mating, literally by the mating, it gives birth to new particles and how these lead on to things that we see in the universe. And I thought, on the way here, I was just past this little man, had his trousers down and he was peeing into this vertical thing, and I'm looking at it thinking, is he oh my god, that's an actual thing for people to stand and pee in the street. And I thought,
it's just there, isn't it? It's around the corner.
Yeah, what? No way. And then of course you come in here, and as you were talking about earlier, the toilets are unisexual, and actually at Ravensbourne where I work, all the toilets are unisexual.
Right.
So all the students going to the same places basically. And when I first came across that, I was a bit disturbed, thinking, oh, okay, I have to get used to this liberated way of, working with gender.
To a phone box outside as well, so
I know.
that's where you poo. So
I know, but I just want to add one thing really to the commentary, which is quite some time ago, I was asked to write an article about being homosexual. Right. I'm not homosexual. I had to write an article about being homosexual. And I talked to quite a few people who are gay and lesbian, and I also talked to people who were hermaphrodites. One of my former partners had hormones genetically as a result, which led her to have those kind of tendencies more than a female. So I was curious about this, and I found that separately from biological roots, within us as human beings, we do have polar functions, if you will, what you could call male or female, yin and yang, if you like.
Yeah.
But the way I looked at it was in the brain.
Say that again?
The way I looked at it was in the brain.
Okay. Yeah.
And many of you may know that, for example, people who might be women might typically be considered to be more right-brained. But I found in the research that I did that this wasn't true. Actually, men and women are equal in terms of being left and right-brained, in terms of the proportions of use that they actually have. But actually, what was more interesting was the other parts of the brain. The reptilian instinctive part of the brain, the mammalian empathic part of the brain, and the modern human creative cortex part of the brain. It turns out these are the things that really distinguish men and women.
Oh, right. In what sense?
Yeah, and it turns out that the instinctive emotional aspect is more biased in men.
Okay.
And the emotional creative aspect is more biased in women.
Okay.
And I realised that actually that feels right. That feels right to me in terms of all the encounters and hundreds of people I've been profiling. That seems like it's very true. I don't find very many men who are empathic and creative.
Right.
I tend to find a lot more men who are instinctive and maybe creative, instinctive and maybe empathic, but not empathic and creative. So
You're
I think
about the order of things.
Yeah, you were talking about glow in the dark stuff, but I feel there's more distinction with men and women in terms of how they are creative.
Right, so instinctive and creative versus empathic and creative, and that comes back to this idea of behaviors, right?
Yeah, I was going to say actually, because I mean the research that we were talking about, there's been this research from Israel actually, so that if you look at a brain, you cannot tell whether it's male or female. I suppose what sort of flags up when you say that in my mind is, well, how much of that is because of neuroplasticity and the way the brain develops as you live?
how much of that empathetic part of the brain is simply because being biologically female and the path you've gone down, that's developed that side.
Because society also and how it's interacted with you, you've had to develop that possibly.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see as gender fluidity, intersex, all these things become more and more, schools become more gender neutral, whether that will actually disappear, that distinction, and then it will be proved that it was a sort of cultural and social effect on the brain.
Also, speaking from a neuroscientific point of view, wasn't there a lot of... Go ahead. I have a special mic. Yes.
I was going to say, wait, you've got the Madonna mic.
Out-of-body voice, yeah. Isn't there also research that looks at male brains being a little bit more similar to autistic brains in terms of having hemispheric specializations with not so much communication via the corpus callosum between the hemispheres, which gives the appearance of women being able to multitask, but obviously nobody can multitask. They could do it quicker. So what about that piece of research?
Curious, I'm not an expert in it, but I have kind of sort of read things like that. But it does also explain something which I'm not going to articulate this very well, but it does relate exactly to what you were just saying, which I think when you look at behaviours of men and women, not so much in different cultures, but in different communities within a culture, say England's quite a good example of this. I bet if you looked at the male and female brains, or brains of people who self-identify as male and female in London versus somewhere randomly picked in the middle of the countryside, I bet the things that you were talking about would probably be more apparent in people who grew up in more traditional communities than people who grew up in cosmopolitan communities, because I'm just taking the minute snapshot that is my social life. I don't think there's a lot of conformists there. Most of the men would typically probably show the aspects of women that you were talking about, and vice versa. A lot of my female friends are like physicists, bankers, very kind of,
So Jazz did a multicultural study with people all over the world, so that's kind of interesting. You want to?
One of the things I want to add about that from the neuroscientific perspective is that this 5-brained way of looking at things rather than a 2-brain way of things is only part of the story. There's the left and right, there's the reptilian instinctive, there's the mammalian empathic or emotional, limbic hypothalamic part of the brain, and then there's the neocortex, which is the modern human creative aspect, the intelligent aspect. But those are the 5 physical parts of the brain. But in a Lord of the Rings way, there's one to bind them all, and that is that's the electrical field, the field of the brain, which also ties in with the heart's field as well. So there's something bigger than the brain, which actually is responsible for our behaviours, even from an epigenetic point of view, where the way that we think and how we consciously are can influence our genetics and even the balance of hormones in our body, and whether we have more masculine-oriented hormones or they're feminine-oriented hormones. So I don't think it's a fixed thing. It actually depends on your consciousness. Your consciousness can dictate to your genetics via steroid chain exactly how your genetics behaves. So I believe it's possible for a person to literally think their way into a different sex.
So there we are. I mean, that's an idea of mind, and you're doing a lot on what people can learn from each other in terms of the different genders and empathy.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to you more about that later. One of the things that I was finding as I did research into brain differences, one of the ways I wanted to structure the book was to have a brain scan, show that a scientist could identify me as typically a male from a group of people because of the way that I respond to viewing this particular film or whatever, and then go back in a year's time and see whether I could trick that system by having learnt to view in a different way, kind of thing. But the problem was, the more I speak to it, there seems to be a little bit of an argument going on. Sharma has been telling me that there is basically no identifiable brain differences.
Based on this research from
You're
Israel.
saying that as well. My natural sense was coming more from where you're coming from, that actually it's fascinating to look at, but I think it's what we all agree on here is that there are things that we look at as causes. It's to do with linear and circular cycles, basically. So there are things that we look at as causing us, like genetics. Okay, I've been born a male, therefore that's caused that. But the choices that I make during my life lead to the next set of evolution. So depending on what I'm attracted to and what I encourage and my values that I have, I'm actually as much a cause of the next stage of that as I am an effect of the genes that have made me.
Okay.
So I think while you have a discussion, you're always looking at a one-way linear cause as a natural, is just how we talk and tell stories, but actually often things are both cause and effect at the same time, and
Much more cyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
I did profiling of about 1,000 people to look at how they demonstrate their way of learning for creativity. And one of the things I discovered was that it fell into two kind of camps, really. There were the people who were very realistic and didn't believe in things until they saw them, and they tend to veer away from their imagination and emotions except for emergencies. And equally, there were people who came from the other direction. There were people who were always in their imagination and their emotions, and they only veered into reality in emergencies, you know. But on the whole, everybody had a mix of these qualities. And what I found was that there were instances where I was working with them where they would start in the real world and be realistic and then slowly drift up into their emotion and imagination, and then they'd come back through that process back into the real world. And when you look at it like that, it just looks like they're going up and down in a line. But actually, if you turn that on its side, you realise that that motion going up and down is actually them going round in a circle.
Yeah.
And you realise actually they're cycling through a state of consciousness, but it's one state of consciousness. It's not two. It just looks like two because of the way that you're experiencing it. But internally, at a deeper level, they're actually going through one cycle.
So it's about visualization.
And I was just going to make a point. It's kind of moved on from there a little bit now, but basically just to say that just on this genetic determinism thing, which I think is it's kind of been addressed already, but all of the information about is on the X chromosome, not on the Y chromosome. There's no genetic material on the Y chromosome. It's just something that turns a switch that allows a particular pattern of development to actually ensue. So everything about sex, masculinity, femininity is epigenetic rather than genetic.
Louis had a quick announcement to make.
Yes, this can follow on from any of the conversations we've had over this weekend, is because we're looking at real science. You're talking about real science now. So I just wanted to announce to the world, I'm going to stick this on Periscope as well. So
we are periscoping right now, actually.
You're periscoping?
Well. Right there.
Okay, well, it's going out through our channel as well now. So hello,
Great.
This is Louis from Sci Fi London, coming out on Periscope again. I'm trying to flip my camera. Oh, there we go. So now you can see my fat palm. Hello. So this is just to announce that we've got a partnership going between Sci Fi London and New Scientist magazine, and we'll be launching officially next week. There'll be a website up at scifilondon.com/New Scientist, where we're launching a VR challenge to create a VR experience with a scientific theme to it. There's at the moment we're building a set of prizes. There'll be all sorts of stuff coming on, but there's at least £1,000 in cash as well for anyone who wants to take part in this. It will last for 3 months. You've got until the mid-August to develop your VR experience, but it must be on an untethered device. So that's Google Cardboard, Samsung Gear, and so on. So an untethered VR science challenge, and then the winning and the winning, I was going to say film, but it's not a film. The winning experience,
yes.
And also the best experiences that we get in will all then be invited to come down to New Scientist Live, which is happening in September at XL in London. It's a 4 or 5 day event with...
Quick question for you. We have a whole bunch of people here on Body and Identity who've talked about VR. In order to enter this, do they have to be programmers, or can they also be the ideas people?
Anybody can enter.
Right.
What we're looking for is a finished experience. So if there are ideas people who want to work with a team and build something and then deliver something that works in Google Cardboard, they can do that. If they want to get much deeper into programming game engine, you can download a piece of software called Unity for free.
Yes.
And you can start developing in that. It's to get something amazing, you need to, like anything, you can buy a film camera and get a piece of software to edit stuff. If you're not a filmmaker, you might not make the best film, but at least have a go. Have a go, people. Where am I looking? There's my camera. So it's, you know, there is software out there, it's freely available, and if you put it on an untethered device, then, you know, it makes it accessible to pretty much anyone in the world. We'll also accept VR 360, 360 films as well through YouTube, but again, the premise is that it's a scientific film, whether that's, you want to explain how chakras might, you know, be something that deal with EMP, you know, EM fields, or whether you want to do something that's about how the heart works, whatever it is, a science theme to it, untethered, and details will be on our website from next week. So that's scifilondon.com/new scientist. There we are, thank you. And I just wanted to thank Mikey and the gang at Talkaoke, and James at Sci Fi, and Jugular, and Spheres, and all of our other partners, Subpack. We've got everyone here. This is the last day of Hackstock. It's been absolutely fantastic. And we've got 5 days left of the festival. Lots of films to see, so there you go. Thanks.
Thank you. We can. Yeah.
Just very quick point about, because you mentioned the heart. We haven't talked much about love, which is one of my favourite subjects.
Yeah.
Where does love come into this?
We are talking about gender quite a lot.
Yeah,
We're talking about body and identity. Love needs to be a part of that conversation.
It all sounds a bit cold, but what about love? Do you know what I mean? What about connection, like an emotional, romantic connection between people?
I'm quite afraid of love in the future, because I came here yesterday and wore a virtual reality headset for the first time, and when I went to the fourth film, I discovered that I was in a very futuristic sort of bedroom setting with lots of naked people.
Orgy,
and
was your words.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, because once you create an immersive experience like that, where body and identity are kind of all pretty much interchangeable, then there's going to be some very strong filmmakers vying for your attention and that sort of thing.
Wasn't it? I don't think it was Madame Butterfly, but it was one of them where, like, the main characters fall in love with each other without realizing that one of them's a man.
Yeah.
Which one was that?
Well, there was a Danish girl recently, but...
Yeah, no, it was. I think it was Madame Saigon or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, but the decision was to carry on loving each other despite that, the gender difference, I suppose.
I was just going to say, building on from that, I mean, this is something I've thought about. I'm wondering if it might be a healthy move, because is it going to change how we associate love and sex? I mean,
yes.
If we take love and sex as two very different things, that stops muddying so much water and actually might be a healthy move for society. Like one case in point is how, I wish I could back this up with the story I was reading it from, but there's one country who are wanting to change sex education so that we stop lying to children and stop saying that sex is all about procreation.
Right.
And that move is one that might be follow this line.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It might be a move away from visual, although it's a move towards visual experience on the first hand. It may create a visual experience that, because it doesn't have all the tactile stuff to begin with, actually creates more distance as well, and makes the tactile side of it and the sensual side of real interaction more appealing. Yeah, I can see that.
I think sex education should actually be much more about emotional education, because you kind of, at school, you're kind of taught, oh, this goes in here, and, you know, this is, you know, this swims up, and what. But they don't tell you that as soon as you start having sex, you're going to be hit with like a emotional tsunami, and you're just going to go, oh, this is completely different to what I've learned at school, but this is like, wow.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that's why it doesn't really work as it is now. And personally, I think separating love and sex, to me, sounds like separating emotion and sex. I would want to go the other way, really,
Not
and make
separate
sex
them.
more emotional and less
Cold.
kind of porn-based.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that one.
So Vienne, which is showing here and is at Cannes in 2 weeks, which is a film I co-directed with Michelle Rayhack, which is a tantric virtual reality experience. And it's kind of about this. It's kind of about how people are kind of treating each other like socks and masturbating into each other. You know, like these are bodies, and people are doing that now. Like, it's kind of gross and it's kind of weird and it's kind of happening.
True.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes we have sex with people and it's like, whoa, what is this? This is completely sensual. It's not even about emotion.
Non-sensual, yeah.
Yeah, non-sensual. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's just about the feeling. It's
Yeah.
like it's an addiction. It's like kind of eating a pack of crisps.
Yeah.
And I think it's. I think we do need to get past this, and it's. I learned a lot in the tantric experience with making VN,
Yeah.
and I've learned about sort of energy conversion. About like, if you have this kind of like urge for sex, and actually it's kind of something you should convert into something else and direct it into something else within yourself. Because a lot of the time when you have like sexual urges, it's actually just like the instinctual part of your brain, right? It's like the reptilian part of your brain is kind of going, yeah, well, you know, whether you're a guy or whether you're a girl, and you're kind of doing these kind of things.
Yeah.
And really, it's just really like an appreciation of love for this other human
being.
Yeah, whatever sex they may be. Yeah, and
how did it come into when you're creating a VR experience like this? We talked a little bit about behavior, we talked about physical body, and if it was about emotional identity, how did you learn anything about that when making the tantric experience?
Well, yeah, actually, there was one person who was acting in it who didn't quite understand. He came in a little bit late into the process, and he wasn't taken through like sort of the tantric training a little bit as much as everyone else was. Everyone sort of got to know each other because of a month. A couple of them already knew each other.
4 months.
No, 1 month. 1 month. So
yeah.
they kind of meet each other and get to know each other, and they sort of really started to love each other. It was very loving.
Yeah.
And he kind of came into it with this other viewpoint, like he's performing. He's got the thing, and I'm constantly sort of checking to see if the camera was looking at him, and he wasn't doing it in this. He wasn't in the moment of the appreciation with the people that he was with, and it was actually more of an internal thing for himself.
Right.
Do you know? And I think this is kind of the thing, and I think this comes down to empathy, and it comes down to a lot of things really, and. Almost, I'm kind of lacking the language to describe what's here, but I think we're all kind of understanding what's being said here.
Yeah.
Like how it's sex and these central moments should be a connectedness and of true empathy with the other person, rather than sort of something which is for oneself to kind of be like, yeah, that feels good.
Yeah.
I feel I look great.
What's
This is
interesting
amazing.
is you just made a distinction, I think, between performing an identity and actually feeling that identity in any meaningful way, and actually allowing yourself to truly be immersed in that is possibly a different thing than performing an identity.
Yeah. So I think that's, yeah. So I guess performing.
I think there's a bit of a distinction here. We talked about identity. We talked about how performance, by putting on a different costume or blah blah blah. Now I can be a different identity. That is a form of taking on an identity, but that's performance.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily being a different thing.
Yeah. So it is kind of an ego thing. Yeah, it is, and this is what happened to this person that was on VN.
Yeah.
And yeah, because it was an ego thing. So I think once you kind of let it go, and there's nothing else, and it is just being in the moment with the people that are there, and just feeling the love with the people that are there. That, rather than it's sort of constantly sort of checking on oneself, and I think that's maybe when you can be more free with love. And I think there's certainly something talking about gender, like how. Thankfully now, men are being way more loving towards each other. I think there's certainly been a lot of fear in the past of dude, I can't be too loving, I'm going to be gay, man. What do you think I'm gay? It's like, I don't know, I want to hug you.
Depending on what society you're
gay.
from.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of, and now like men are being sort of more touchy, and I think it's good.
Yeah.
There's being more touchy, because I mean like this, in I think in South Korea, like guys are very touchy with each other. I think it's kind of, this is good. There's no fear of like, sorry, it doesn't matter with these kind of things, sexuality. But I think there's definitely been a lot of, where it's left over from the stiff upper lip sort of era of England.
Yeah,
maybe.
the reservedness.
Reservedness is kind of being like, oh, no, silly business, I'm touching them. And I think it's kind of, just be more tactile. We're missing a lot of touch.
So
we
doesn't
should do
that
it
have a bigger sort of implication as to how we can change our identities? It cannot be necessarily that simple. I mean, whether it's through VR experiences or whether, you know what I mean? It takes a whole lifetime to become who you are with the experiences that you have. I don't know, doesn't that have a much bigger sort of repercussion as to can we change our identity really quickly in one particular lifespan?
But you have to go sort of deep down within yourself and try and find things. You have to learn about yourself, so that takes a bit of a journey anyway. Because when we grow up, things happen to you, and so maybe it changes bits of your personality that you hadn't even realised. And you have to sort of come to terms with some of the things of who you are, and then you can sort of spend time trying to work on developing them. And it's really all about habits. Where I've suddenly made a correlation between what is a kink and what is a fetish, right? And I think that you can do this with everything, right? And so, so people use the word fetish wrongly. They think fetish means that this is like it's actually a kink. When actually fetish, what it really means, the definition of it means that you cannot orgasm without this particular thing happening. And a kink is something that it's like a spice of life. Right? And I think this is with everything. If something is a spice of life, it's pretty good for you. Whether it's like drugs, sex,
whatever.
A certain person, or a little bit of food, cakes or whatever. Or alcohol or anything. But then if it's a fetish, I can't go out unless I am drunk. I can't go out unless I take drugs. I can't.
So these are learned behaviors. You think that could be
and then
unlearned?
It's a fetish, and it's become a detrimental thing to your existence. And I think. I'm putting a definition between kink and fetish here. I think it's kind of, I'm seeing it correlated with everything that we do, and so I think it's about creating a habit that will get you away from fetishes and get you maybe appreciate kinks, because we should be able to appreciate kinks and make sure we can control these things and keep them kinks and not let them become fetishes.
So like a mixture maybe of VR and biohacking could get us there, not just.
It was going to help us, but it still involves going deep down. It's only going to inspire one to go into themselves to be able to make these changes. But it's certainly about making the good habits and creating your life like a garden and looking after it as such.
Yeah, we moved on from it a little, but I wanted to add on the sex education thing. And it's not only about the emotional aspect missing from it, but also how early you start, because I don't remember which country it was about. I think it was Netherlands, but I may be wrong, that I read they start actual sex education in kindergartens, but it starts as how do you feel when you hug another person, and it's all about touching each other in general and those emotions. And they did some research that actually teenagers there are more likely, very high percentage, say that their first sexual experience was desired and pleasurable compared to most countries. So it actually that emotional aspect is missing, but also you should start very early to actually reach them, I think.
We had a point here as well. Let me just swivel around. There you go.
I kind of had a point. I don't want to keep jumping from one point to another, because I'm going to pick up on something different now, something that you said, kind of going back to you making a film. You said when you were in preparation for filming, there was a process that your actors took part in, and somebody joined later, so he wasn't or she wasn't able to kind of connect in the same way for ages or at all, I don't know. But I'm just wondering, you were doing presumably a film which was just about which involved acting presumably, so I wonder what did you I mean what was that film, because what I'm trying to say is maybe he was or she was doing just their job acting as without actually being in that mind frame of living that experience. They were just recreating it.
That difference between performance and living. Yeah.
So I guess it was. There was some arranged moments of it, because there's a bit where someone gets born in between the people, and there's a bit where they're all sort of lying around in sort of a circle. So there were some constructed bits of it, but the bits where they were sort of enjoying each other, then there was no performance in that. That was literally just them enjoying themselves. And it was documentation. And there was a guy who had never had a homosexual experience, and he just went for it. He was like, "Wow, I'm gonna go with this. This is great," and he just went, and he just spent his entire time with the guys. And sorry.
But doesn't that become something else then?
Something else from what? I suppose.
That's no longer filmmaking. That is just creating a bubble for people to kind of explore their nature and kind of kind of try new things out. But to me, it's different to filmmaking. My friend recently started making a film which was this intense love story, and it ended up with everybody having sex on set because they felt the characters so much. But then to me, that became just something else. That wasn't a film anymore. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what other people think.
Then again, it was a VR experience rather than just a film.
Yeah, so VR can be made differently. Particularly I think the area. well, what I'm trying to do with virtual reality and the people I'm working with trying to do in virtual reality is to try and make more dreamlike spaces and how is the best way to sort of recreate a dream that you're going to put someone through for like 5-10 minutes. And I think sort of going at it in a very like how the film world has done before is we don't have to do that. We have an opportunity to do things very differently now. I don't want to like to make things that are like The Hills, which are like kind of fake but real, but fake but real. You know, nothing can be learned from that. It's
What's The
rubbish,
Hills?
you know. I think it was one of the first like what they're called. You know, so reality. What are they called?
Mockumentary?
Sort of docudrama. Yeah, reality TV. Yeah, well, it's kind of it's reality, but it's not. It's scripted reality.
Right,
Yeah, one of the worst ones. I went on to Party House once, which was a Channel 4 one, and they got a mansion, and you could have your own party. My friend won this thing, put a party on, and it was all just fakes. Like the discussions that would happen. I went to this thing like, wow, there's going to be a party, and it was party kid, 90s party kid themed, and they had no idea what 90s party kid themed was anyway, and they were just faking the dramas. They were just so. I saw them get two girls. Who knew each other well, they used to go out with each other, and they just said like, well, why didn't one of you say something to the other that you always thought about the other, that you've never quite been able to say? And you could just say that now, and we're just going to film that. Yeah, but that's it. And then they say it, and then they suddenly he's like, what, you thought that? Why do you think that? And then suddenly they're like, yeah, this is great, it's gold. And then they just cut it in as if it happened, and it's like, this is so fakey. It's not like
really
that. That's not good.
We're going to go Catherine, Daniel, and then Jazz.
No, there's just actually about something that's being discussed, because this is all about virtual reality today, and your film, and I think what you touched on, which is really important, is that in this world of virtual reality, augmented reality, but let's stick to virtual reality, that it has a lot of limitations, and so you can't move, you can't see your hands, you take it off, and reality is actually amazing. But what virtual reality is really, virtual reality can't do reality as well as reality yet. But what it can do is do the things that reality can't. So it can change your body, it can change your, and I think that films like that, explore that space, are amazing, because so many people are just trying to create reality with virtual reality, and your same body with virtual reality, and actually, well, take it off, you could do it all right. But you can, do amazing things in a virtual space that you can't in reality. And in terms of body identity, that's just opened the door for a whole load of experiences, which I think is really important and really exciting as well.
I still can't help but think that, you put your little virtual headset, it's probably not that little, but your virtual headset on, virtual reality headset on, and for a little bit, you're performing. I'm wondering whether you're actually able to do identity, unless you do this consistently for a long period of time. So we had an artist called Mark Farid who was doing exactly that for 28 days, putting on a VR headset, where being somebody else, doing everything that other person is doing for 28 days constantly. And that's possibly something that's, yes, I am changing my identity, but if I put it on for 10 minutes, I don't think, it's still, for me, there's still the idea of, am I performing something? And that's a form of changing identity, but I'm sorry, Daniel had a...
It was just a quick point on the film, and I think what was really interesting about it was how plot doesn't operate in the same way, because it's actually frustrating that you can't interact with it yet. So your hands aren't actually there. There was one moment where I put my hands out and I was like, I can't see my hand. Where is it?
you must have touched people.
So actually plot is kind of not necessarily interesting, because you'd want to change the plot straight away, and that causes all sorts of things, because you want to the experience of being able to look at, say, someone being angry but really close to you. That's something in real life you don't get to do. The cinema can kind of do that a little bit for you as well. But what was interesting about your film, I didn't know it was your film before, was being able to be there. It then frees you up. So, for example, where you're looking, you become aware that you, even on the level of where you move your eyes as a human being, there's part of you which is stopping you from doing that because of a social reality that is around you. And then there's a moment where you realise, there's no social reality here at all. And then it frees you up to look at different things, look at a guy's body and kind of, okay, what is it about this that people can find attractive? I wouldn't find this attractive in a social reality. There's no social reality. Okay, well, people do. Okay, you look at it and you kind of, then you can suddenly start seeing I actually had a very lo-fi form of this out in France where I was living, where my neighbour had this bizarre place where he built himself a little bar, and when he'd built a bar, he decided to put a venue next to it. And in the venue, it was called the Orgasmatron, based on a Woody Allen film, I think.
Barbarella. Okay.
Yeah, in the venue, you'd go up onto a kind of stage, and he'd make you put your 3 favourite songs on before you went in. And as you walked up, you were surrounded by mirrors on every side. And it was hilarious. Like, no one was watching, but you were always worried that maybe this guy is filming you or something. You kind of had these social worries. But you got there, and you would start off by kind of dancing to your favourite tune. And then there would be this weird moment where you realised, hang on, who am I actually dancing for? There is no audience. I am the audience. And it was such a liberating moment where you then go, okay, I can just enjoy this music by not dancing or by dancing or doing whatever, but you're really alone for the first sort of time in that social, very hyper-social situation of having to dance for people and stuff, which is often. So yeah, I kind of found that an interesting sort of early proponent of virtual reality experiences, but mainly with wine palettes and mirrors, but yeah.
I've kept out of this. I understand that in some cases where VR is being used and the two people don't know each other and one tends to be a male, some males have crossed into the inner space of the ladies and have done predatorial things, and we're perhaps going to have to need, like we need with drones, some protocols about VR, what you can do and what you can't do. It comes down to consent in the end. That's my comment.
Yeah. Just on that, I don't know if you've seen the recent article exactly about that, where the back off button. Yeah, they're looking for a back off button, and they're
Talk about it.
It's just been published actually with a New Scientist that there's a sudden realization that there's a need for a back off button. So although you don't have a physical body, you know, where your personal space exists within VR, and people need to abide that. And if someone gets too close to you, as if they would, you need to say, you know, back off. So this whole, how do you address this idea of presence without a physical body and personal space without a physical body? I don't know if you probably had loads of experience with that.
Sorry, describe the question again?
Yeah. How you found your actors dealt with this idea of personal space without, and people who've watched the film, personal space without a physical body, and what do you do when someone comes too close to you in virtual reality,
Or can't get
close enough, or how do you address that?
Slightly different example. If, for example, your image was being used in virtual reality, so say I'd been filmed from every angle and I could then be mapped on. I'm sure this will happen in the world of porn again. At some point, you can create whoever you want to be in your movie or whatever through mapping. Yeah, what right do you have over your own body if you're not
your own image?
Your own image if you're not inhabiting it, or if you're only inhabiting it sometimes. Or yeah.
Jazz as well.
Well, I think so. I mean, you're saying like the physical body. Like, do people have like a disassociation from not having a physical body in virtuality? Well, I think like some of the 360 video stuff it's immersive as it is, but I don't think it's like wholesomely immersive to the point where you're like you're really there. I think like. I mean, when you're watching a film, yeah, you become immersed by it, but you kind of do. You can forget. You feel like, wow, I'm into like Ghostbusters. If you watch it, you know, you do. You really get into a film, and you forget about.
The question was, would you feel violated if somebody came too close to you in virtual reality?
Yeah, well, there's a film which I just finished rendering this morning, actually, which is going to Cannes as well, where you're a baby and you get born out of a womb and you get taken up to your mother and you get held by your mum. And there was a bit where, because I was looking at it this morning, I was like, oh, maybe I need to do something with this, because you're like right up to your mum and she's sort of breastfeeding you, and like, whoa, this is quite intense. And so that is kind of intense, but then you are a baby after all. You're looking down and you've got this bloody body with an umbilical cord coming out. And because we made like a fake baby body for this and so. And And
I was going to say. The question in everyone's mind. Yeah.
But I think like having a body does do a big thing. I mean, so one of the big things with so the Vive that's happening over there, like when you have a tactile thing that you can see in your hand, you can feel it, and you can sort of see it inside virtual reality, it helps a hell of a lot. And if you give yourself a body, then that helps a lot as well. Like a film that we're making very soon, hopefully it'll be in production quite soon, which is it's going to be telling the story of human trafficking, human sex trafficking, and how Eastern European girls can get caught up with lover boys and these psychological tricks that they do to essentially get them into these sort of prostitute booths. And but we're going to have it from the first-person viewpoint to take people on the journey. So you're going to have the body of a woman going through this.
Of the Eastern European woman. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And this helps a lot as well when you have a body and you can see it. But one of the problems with this is that you have to put yourself in the same position as the body. So like this happens a lot in porn, and it works great with porn because guys are like, whoa, I need to feel like this guy that's having this thing being done to him. And they would get themselves into the position of the guy that's inside the porn, is at this first person degree porn, and so they would have it happening to them. But then if you want to emulate...
VR, right?
Yeah, in virtuality, yeah. But if you want to emulate someone, say, riding a motorcycle in virtuality, then if they're revving it, you're not going to feel like it because you're not moving your hand like that. So suddenly there's a disassociation and you do kind of feel like an observer.
Yeah.
So to get someone fully immersed, to not feel like an observer is an art form in and of itself as well, I would say.
Yeah. And I think Jazz had a point a little while ago, actually. But yeah. Yeah, I want to bring the conversation back to love. All right, Jazz. A few years ago, it must have been the 1990s, I was watching Neighbours, and there was a scene between two girls, and one girl was saying to the other who's madly in love, she said, "Do you know what the most powerful force in the universe is?" And she rather blithely says, "Gravity." And the other woman goes, no, it's love. But oddly enough, I, as a scientist, I'd explored both of those things in terms of consciousness and how we can affect space and time. And we've all probably heard stories of mothers ripping off car doors and being able to detect when their children or offspring are in trouble, this kind of stuff. And I thought, I wonder if there's a relationship between emotion and space and time. And I thought, well, what would it be like if emotion was really, really focused and intense and concentrated? Could it actually affect the fabric of space and time? Could it actually lead a person to even to pick up things across space and time in that kind of way that I just mentioned? I ended up going to Chicago, University of Chicago in Illinois, and I was amongst all these physicists and scientists. It was a physics conference, and I actually presented a paper on the relationship between love and gravity. And if everybody else doing particle physics and this and that, I come along, I'm talking about love and gravity. And I suppose it's the shaman in me that wanted to stir things up amongst these people. But one of the consequences was that when you compare love with gravity, you begin to understand something really, really important. There's an unusual thing about our universe, which is that if you use material instruments to look at what's going on out there in the universe, they only can account for maybe 1 to 4% of what's out there visibly. There's another 95% of stuff that's out there that influences the visible stuff, which people call dark matter, dark energy. Yeah, dark matter. But they can't be detected, but it's there. And I thought, I wonder if it's the same thing with emotions and love, given the relationship that I think there is between them, that especially with regards to sex, because I thought, I wonder if that's what sex really is. The physical stuff, the visible, tangible stuff, is only 1 to 10% of what there really is going on. And the stuff that's really important is that dark stuff that we can't detect, but we nevertheless feel. And I think I've always regarded sex in that kind of way and said, sex is 90% emotional and it's 10% physical. And if you're just having the physical, then you're missing out, really, on most of the stuff. Yeah. So the last point I wanted to make was, it led me to explore shamanism because I wanted to look at how is it possible to get into certain emotional states and maybe even get yourself out of your body into other regions of time and space. And people who have orgasms, I'm sure they have this experience. You know, when they're in that state, they feel like they're in another world, literally. So I studied Chinese shamanism specifically. Looked at how energy can be moved around the body, specifically for preventing aging, but more importantly, how sexual energy can be circulated around the body in order for a person to actually become more enlightened and more evolved. Like in Qigong and Tai Chi, they have a lot of So I think that's my final point, that
if you're going to go into virtual realities, I think it would be useful to explore that dark space that you can't explore in this world.
So emotion-led rather than performance-led changing of identities, no? I think you wanted to talk.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, just kind of. I mean, you're implying that sort of love is somehow could be extra to humanity as well, like could exist without humanity, but.
So yeah, like, you know, what was the relationship between
like
gravity
quite an
and love?
emergent concept, though. The universe doesn't, but doesn't something like love feel like an emergent property of humanity more than something that exists empirically in the universe? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just something about a nuance of definition, but what I think is colloquially understood as love, to me, it seems like something that can only be between generally speaking, can only be between sort of.
What about
humans.
lovebirds?
Or I mean, perhaps I'm missing the nature of gravitational attraction and things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, or like, you know, animals that mate for life, you know, pair bonding, and like whales and elephants, and. But then some don't. So how's that projection? That's just observing what they do.
We need someone's a bit more. We need a biologist here to kind of clarify.
There's two of us
yeah,
here.
Exactly.
There we are.
About evolutionary biology and why different species do have different propensities towards different mating rituals and activities. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's a problem with the English language. We have this one word for
love,
these many different types of love, right?
True.
So in Hungarian, I think there's like 9 different words.
200 in Greek,
types.
right? Different types.
Yeah, loads. There's like
Evo's only one of them, so yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Inuits of ice and stuff.
With snow, yeah.
What is types of love? And I think like that's, I mean, the love you're talking about is sort of the intrinsic love of the universe, of connectedness, of how things, I mean, essentially life is part of the universe, and what is it growing into? There's almost definitely more of it out there. There's more of it that's going to be intelligent, and it's going to be about connectedness, and we will have to connect with them at some point in our lifetime, maybe. But I don't know. It depends. If we get to Alpha Centauri with these little thingies, maybe. You know. But I guess it's that interconnectedness of love, isn't it? And it's not like love between a man and a woman, and the love between like a mother and a daughter.
Sisterly, brotherly.
All these different types of love. I think it's like the stuff that's even more fundamental than that, which is
yeah.
I'll just give an example, a short example. I spent all last week in Luxembourg in the European Union presenting a report, and then I've been at this festival this weekend, and my partner, she's in Australia, she's a bit peeved that I've not spent any time with her at all. And I thought, I'm just doing my thing, and you've got to just have to live with it, blah, blah, blah. But then I had a thought yesterday, which is, you know what, we're a couple, and I'm not taking my responsibility in terms of my role in that couple and making time for her. And I thought, and this is nothing, none of that lovey-dovey stuff. It's not all about sensual sexuality. No, this is just about caring. And I think, it's important to look at love not just from that romantic notion, but look at it from all these other dimensions that we've just been mentioning. And for me, I just discovered that this weekend. I've been a bachelor mentality most of my life. And then at this point, I thought, I'm actually part of a couple. Maybe I ought to be a bit more mature and be a bit more responsible and make some time for this,
I'd love to bring that back to like body and identity and connectedness. I mean, what do you guys think in terms of the relationship between body and identity and connectedness? Is that kind of what we're trying to do by transcending our bodies and like having these different identities, or having my identity meet with your identity, whichever that is today, just a thought.
Well, just on the love topic, I wanted to say, I don't know if anyone has seen in Japan, they have these love dolls, and they're robots.
Right.
And they are very strikingly real. They have, artificial intelligence, they can reply. Artificial intelligence, they can reply, and speak to you, and they look very lifelike. And I was recently in Japan, and I saw, they were having a marriage ceremony between a guy and his love doll. And the emotion, he was so attached. They were, tearing up, and there was some other love doll people in the audience, the witnesses, and they were, very, emotional, all crying, he's going to marry his doll, and she had the wedding dress, and, here's a person who's having a love or emotional attachment to an inanimate object. And so at what point are we going to get to, the Internet of Things,
It's
when
like
things
the
are
film,
connected?
the film Her, no? That's all about that.
I haven't seen that. I should watch that, but,
Say again? No, I haven't. Should we tell us about...
I was going to say there's Her and what's the very recent one? The other film about artificial intelligence.
Oh, Ex Machina.
Ex Machina.
Yeah.
But there's a
Yeah.
very old one which is Lars and the Real Girl, which is simply about a guy who falls in love with a real sex doll. A doll that's made to look very real.
Yeah.
There is actually at the moment, if anyone knows the campaign against sex robots, which
Yes.
is
That
sounds
was it.
ridiculous, but
Yeah.
actually run by some rather serious people about what will happen with sex robots.
It actually comes back to that point about consent and stuff as well, because we're going to have, female sex bots essentially, and there was this idea of, that's better than an actual woman.
Yeah, but what's the reflection on us and love?
What's the
and
reflection
what's it
on
gonna
women in that case?
say
If
about
that's
us?
okay. Yeah.
I was going to bring in marriage, and someone else brought it in. At the moment, there are laws about marriage in most countries, whether it's male, male, female, female, or male, male. And in some ways, it's too easy to get married and too difficult to get divorced. It should be more difficult to get married, and you must understand the legal, financial, and all the other involvement before you before you marry. Well, of course, there's no law for that. The law in Japan wouldn't cover that. There's no legal basis in this at all. Although eventually, in 200 years' time, when they have sex bot women,
But
robots,
there are people who want to marry their animals,
The depressing thing is going to be when your sex robot runs off with another sex robot, and you're just left by yourself.
And leaves your little sex robots alone.
It's just in Her, that's exactly what happened. They just ran off with each other, and they're like, "I'm sorry, you're too pedestrian for us now."
No, it's just completely in terms of marrying other things. In anthropology, there's a massively ancient tradition of marrying trees, marrying ghosts, marrying yourself, marrying brothers, in terms of how kinship and an ideology works in order to make kin lines work out. You can, in tribes all over sub-Saharan Africa, I think in lowland South America as well, very often there'll be marriages, someone will marry a tree or a spirit or someone who's dead. Just because it makes lineages, which is very important in terms of material possessions and rights and things, work in a much more
Which is
efficient
really
way.
interesting that you're talking about
and women
identity across a huge lineage
and
of that particular tribe then.
Yeah, exactly. And also women are sometimes, because if they're barren, they're often referred to as him, and often sometimes women can be referred to as men if it helps in terms of the certain tribes in sub-Saharan Africa where it's very important. Men inherit, they're the people who put down the laws, and if someone very important doesn't have a son, sometimes a woman can then be turned in the eyes of the society into a man in order to have that authority, which is necessary to govern and to keep a sort of a tribe in rural Africa.
Wasn't a very recent one about that, actually. There was a female chief who was responsible for 150,000 people who she basically banned female mutilation. Female genital mutilation, and it's kind of uncommon to have a female chief in that particular tribal society, and B, she's also educated. That was interesting. Anyway,
I think this thing about identity and body shape is particularly important in shamanism, because in ancient cultures, and probably even more so in modern cultures, how we, especially with cosmetics, try and make ourselves look like something else. That's a very shamanistic practice, cosmetics. Most people wouldn't think that. But if you think about what it actually involves, then actually it's quite shamanistic.
Define shamanistic in this case.
Here it's changing form, it's changing appearance and appearing to have a different energy or a different life, a different consciousness even, or a different experience for other people to interact with. But in the purest sense, shamanism is about being all life. Not just one life. It's about
being all life.
Being all life, It's about being able to move seamlessly between being human and being animal and plant and rock, for example. When you can do that, then you can have full appreciation of life and you have full reverence and respect for life.
So it's almost like you
are required to have lots of different identities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a requirement. It's a prerequisite for you to be able to take on other identities. But it's also a prerequisite to have it happen the other way around for other things to take on your identity.
Right.
If you can't do both of those things,
That's interesting.
then you're not really qualified as a shaman.
What time is it now?
Yeah, I was just going to go back to what you were saying about love and connectedness. It's just a slight side point, but I feel like a lot of that, you're trying to find a way of describing what was kind of fundamental about it. I think there's something about it which has to do with feeding and eating. It's one of our earliest experiences of love. I haven't said this before, so I don't know. But is being fed by someone and essentially eating them. And it's that gift of them letting us eat them and essentially valorizing the new generation over themselves that is, that to me, very fundamental in that act of connectedness and love. Yeah, sure. But that all nearly always comes from an initial thing that is a physical thing that then develops into the metaphorical kind of emotional feeding and everything like that.
So feeding and eating in a way where both parties end up becoming consumed or a dissolution of their egos in this particular case.
Yeah, it's a giving of your own ego to the next person who's going to take it up in a sense. And also that first experience of being given that, you don't really understand it at the time, but love and feeding are very much connected at the beginning, I think.
So in a sense, we're kind of looking at the idea of, in order to have different ideas of identity, you kind of have to not have identity at all.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about that from a biological perspective. Quite a few years ago, when I started training in Tai Chi and Chinese medicine, Chinese shamanism, one of the first things I learned was to breathe. But we were told to learn how to breathe not just with our physical bodies. We were told to learn to breathe with our hearts. Breathe in emotion, process emotion, and let go of old emotion. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't do that. They take on emotion, it sits there and rots for years, and they don't let go of the toxic stuff, just like we do with our normal breathing. And the same thing with our thoughts. Take in new thoughts, process them, release old thoughts, and you don't end up with baggage. And this process of breathing at each of these energetic levels is critical for maintaining your identity. Because if you don't, and you become toxic in any one of these levels, then your identity becomes corrupted, and you lose your sense of integrity, you become ill, you have poor relationships, and your energy aura field starts to become really heavy to the point where it actually breaks down.
Right.
And that's when you start to age. And you start to get old. So it's actually a necessity for you to stay youthful, for you to breathe, but at all these levels.
Do we have any more points? Sure.
I would just like to, because we do need to close this down, but for Talkaoke at any rate, we always say to give everybody the opportunity to have one last final thought. I mean, I think it's been a very thought-provoking subject, but we've sort of moved away from the question of identity to, in a way, what that identity is for, which I think is probably a more important question. And that's my final thought.
Any thoughts from anybody?
Just also something for everyone to take away, that I think on a large scale how we perceive anything, including ourselves, is formed by the language as well. And just something to consider for everyone. Some languages, such as Estonian and Finnish, don't have gender at all.
We were just talking about that. Yeah, and Bengali.
They actually had some research that children in those countries, they develop their gender identity later than in other ones. So also just something for everyone to think about.
Yeah, as I was looking, part of the research I was doing, I looked at languages that had different genders or not, and you said in Bengali they don't really distinguish between man and woman until you actually have to specify it very clearly.
Like by actually saying man or by actually saying woman.
Just one does this, or But actually, when I looked into French, I found a really interesting difference between how they were when you have the same word in a masculine form and a feminine form. I'll give you 2 examples, and it really got to the key of how I was looking at different gendered ways that I'd been taught to think, which don't have to be like that, but which were for me. So a good example is the word year, or the word day, which can both have a masculine and a feminine in French. So un jour, une journée, un an, une année. And what is the difference between those 2 words when they do it? It's interesting. The masculine version is a unit of measurement. So I'm 10 years old, i.e. 10 units of a year, that you use the masculine, because this is my theory, is that you're abstractifying it and making it into a kind of unit. So it's a masculine kind of way of thought in this dichotomy. The other one is if you say to someone as they're leaving your shop and they're leaving, you say bonne journée as they leave. And the idea behind that is that journée as the feminine is something that you kind of go through. It's an experience, yeah. And I think that's what I was really interested about what you said with your film, was that actually the film is moving slightly away. What works in the VR thing that you're doing is that it's really experiential more than plot-based or kind of goal-driven. And it made me quite queasy at times because I wasn't sure what I was meant to be doing or what was going on, and I became a subject of it because where I was looking was becoming part of the kind of experience. So it was a bit difficult, but I think there's a whole movement in culture which is basically taking on this more what traditionally would have been called feminine ways of viewing the world. I think what you said about gender and your film kind of tie into that for me. So if anyone wants to talk to me about these things afterwards.
Yeah, and in fact, if anybody wants to talk to any of the speakers afterwards, please do. So we've got Jugular Productions. We'll put up everything that we've been doing today. We do different themes called Dialogue every sort of month, which are cross-disciplinary salons. So me and Catherine are going to be doing one on gender, actually, at some point in August, where we're asking the question, is gender a construct? But obviously today encompassed a bit of gender and, all sorts of things to do with love and sex and body and identity. You had another thing to say?
Oh, just curious. I think as a group we've been quite good to actually skirt around sort of social conservative and religious reasons for a lot of the issues that we've been talking about anyway. But I just wanted to name drop Bettany Hughes, who did this 3-part series called Divine Women, which is really worth watching and actually touches on a lot of what we've been talking about, but from a very historical perspective. And I think people might find it quite interesting. Divine Women.
Yeah, Divine Women. Okay, so thank you very much for being a part of this. Thank you to the speakers, thank you to the audience, thank you to Talkaoke, and thank you to Sci Fi London and Hackstock. And this has been a lovely little mashup between Dialogue and Talkaoke. So, thanks.